It's a pleasure to be here. I've got to sort of be careful and stay on script. I'm here to talk about a specific piece of work and to leave the general stuff to the founders, Joe and Dom. But it's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to see so many familiar faces, and it's quite weird actually seeing faces from, for me, different generations of work. And as Joe has just reminded you, I am an ex-landfiller. I've been in this sector for, it's going to be 30 years next year. And most of that was spent landfilling. It'll still be a while before that's overtaken. So I come with an operational bias, I suppose, and you'll probably see a bit of that going through. So I am here to talk to you about, is that going to work, or do we need to reset this to the presentation? I'm going to let somebody more, yeah, I'll let you do that. We are in the process of launching the 10th edition of our residual waste infrastructure review. Peter, I say in the process, has it actually gone live?
Press release has gone out.
Press release has gone out, and it's going to be uploaded and available soon. So it's not gone live yet, so you're going to actually get a little bit of a preview as to what we're going to be saying in our 10th edition. And as Joe just trailed, we're moving into Europe, so it's not only an updated version, we're actually covering new geographic territory as well, so it should be really interesting. Some of the people who are our friends and are here today are from the media. They can be friends and from the media all at once, so they may be particularly interested in this, I'm sure. I must say thank you, by the way. I'm a complete fraud, obviously. I mean, I do direct this and oversee this and have a little bit of input, but far cleverer people than me that can add up actually do all the hard work checking on what's going on the residual waste market. And Chris Cullen is our sort of mission control. He's here today. If anybody wants to know anything about residual waste, ask him. Chris will, you know, in a very modest way, just mention in passing that we keep track of every single residual waste infrastructure facility across the whole of Europe, and we're up to date on it. And that's not me, that's Chris. So, just to quickly run through the history. So we've been doing this biannual review, I was about to say twice a year, for nearly 5 years now. So it's 10th edition. October 2011, before exports had really taken off. There was quite a lot changing at that time. I guess and here's the latest version here, you're going to see a bit about. I can actually point with this as well, can't I? And I guess one of the themes that runs through, people always remember the headlines, one of the themes that runs through all of this is that Eunomia has been doom and gloom predicting overcapacity in the future. There's going to be too much infrastructure and not enough waste. That's not quite how we put it. And, you know, how have things changed as we've gone through these 10 versions? Well, the goalposts have moved a bit. They do always move a bit. So our predictions back then haven't always come true. And you could be cynical that the predicted overcapacity date is always off into the distance, and it's just us getting people to listen to what we have to say. Actually, that's about assumptions changing. The market does change. There's a huge amount of, there's about 5 million tonnes residual waste treatment infrastructure capacity consented in the UK, more than there is residual waste. And it was only 5 or 6 years ago, we all used to think that, as Joe just mentioned, planning was one of the main barriers. Well, no, it isn't. So things change, and we learn about that. We said back in 2011 that overcapacity could be with us as soon as, I think, 5 or 6 years' time. Well, 5 years later, we're saying it could be with us in 3 or 4 years' time. So, yes, the assumptions do change and the predictions do change, but the direction of travel is the same. We're getting closer, and we'll have a look at some of those numbers. So, when we talk, just to set the context, we're talking about residual waste, and we're not talking about landfill, we're talking about infrastructure that replaces landfill, and by the same token, we're not talking about things higher up in the waste hierarchy like recycling. Let's just keep the boundaries nice and clear. You can try, but it's mostly impossible to burn and recycle waste at the same time. So, looking at the UK first, what have we got? So this is the UK situation. We've got time along here, going from today on the left, doesn't show very well, does it, up to 2030. We picked 2030 as a useful sort of endpoint because it's where our friends in Europe tell us we have to reach new recycling targets, or are about to tell us we're going to have to reach new recycling targets through the circular economy. I say that as if I can distance myself from what our friends in Europe are saying. Of course, our friends in Europe have employed a certain consultancy to give all the advice on the circular economy, and that's what Dominic's doing. So it's Dominic's fault that the 65% recycling target, it would have been 70 if it had his way, is probably coming unless you all vote to leave Europe next month, and that's coming over here. So here's the arisings of the commercial industrial waste and the municipal waste all chucked together. Currently up at about 25 million tonnes, and it's coming down. It's coming down because recycling is going up. It's not coming down as fast as it would do because waste arisings are growing as we have more people and more houses and et cetera, et cetera. Let's overlay on that as a matter of fact. These aren't things that are debated or disagreed with by anybody sensible. Here is the operational capacity. Nearly 15 million tonnes of operational residual treatment capacity, mostly incinerators, some MBT. There it is. On top of that, we've got, as of today, about 4.3 million tonnes, according to Chris, 4.3 million tonnes of treatment capacity under construction. So we're going through the biggest, as we know, the reason this line's going up so fast is because we're on a massive build campaign, mostly incinerators being built, mostly on the back of PFI contracts, but some merchant capacity as well. So that's a given. These things are coming. There's no doubt they are going to follow through. There's a small amount, nearly 1 million tonnes extra, what we call committed. These are facilities that are past the financial investment decision. They're financially closed. They just haven't started construction yet. They're in a procurement phase. So nearly 20 million tonnes is happening. Overlay on that, since about 2010-11, which we'll talk about it a bit more in detail in a moment, the RDF export markets. There's a lot of waste leaving the UK system is one way of looking at it, or going to a different place. And there it is. We've shown it growing up to 3.7 million tonnes is our prediction for this year. It hit about 3.4, I think it was, in 2015. We've actually been quite conservative and said it flattens off. We've always predicted 3 to 4 million tonnes. That's one prediction that I'm happy to remind ourselves about because we seem to be being right. Although actually I think there's signs of it possibly going higher than that. But we're being relatively conservative about it staying there. Brexit, again, could have an impact on that. Who knows? All the assumptions are built into the report, which you'll be able to download shortly. So what's left? Well, there's landfill. And I suppose, I mean, in case anybody hadn't noticed, landfill, and part of me feels slightly sad about this, is on its knees. I mean, there's going to be a few sites left, and there's certain types of waste which will always need to go to landfill, but landfill is declining far faster than anybody expected or probably wanted, and probably faster than is sensible. But that's another story. We might touch on that later. And just one line to chuck on top of that. If you want to take a view that the recycling rates of 65% municipal, and within there is also 75% for commercial and 80%, I think, for industrial. If you want to take a view that those recycling rates won't be met, we've given you a slightly more pessimistic version up there. I think that's a 60% recycling rate for municipal, 65 for commercial, and 70, I think, for industrial. So what does that tell us? It tells us that our latest prediction is that if you really want to read it this way, with all our assumptions, in 3 or 4 years' time, we're heading towards overcapacity. It's nothing new. That's what we've been saying, and that's what the figures show. To not think that you need to either need to believe there's a lot more waste out there, or there's going to be a lot more waste out there than we're predicting. And one of the ways of believing that is to believe that recycling levels are going to be much lower. So that's possible. Or you believe that RDF exports are going to stop or decline. I don't think it's particularly sensible to think about these facilities that have investment decisions and are being built are not going to take waste. I guess some of them might fall over. That's possible. So, just want to move on briefly to talk about RDF exports. And I think that, there's sort of three main ways, logistically, that waste is leaving the UK. You've got the roll-on, roll-off vehicles, sometimes in slave vehicles, sometimes just in HGVs that go on, sometimes the ferries that you're on, going across to Holland. You've got some containerisation coming in. There's one of Twence's containers coming into Holland from the UK. And you've got a lot more bulk loading. This is a 3,000-tonne coaster leaving the port of Pembroke, taking Pembrokeshire's and Ceredigion's waste to Sweden, something you wouldn't have imagined would have happened a few years ago. So that's how it's moving. These logistics are improving all of the time. There's more efficiencies. The market's consolidating a bit. There's less sort of spot brokers. There's more experienced traders with portfolios of off-takers and groupings of waste providers. And they are targeting waste from all over the place in the UK. We've even seen waste from places like North Somerset going through Avonmouth, although that's not happening at the moment. Right through to West Wales, and of course the east of England is pretty well serviced by Holland directly. And just as a matter of interest, there's the growth in RDF exports back in 2010. The driver for this obviously is landfill tax. Mostly, it's, at the beginning at least, it was nearly all commercial industrial waste coming out of landfill. There's a bit more municipal waste coming into the system, mostly though through commercial operators, not directly through local authorities. And that's grown as landfill tax has gone up. What was it here, 40, 50 pounds a tonne, and the Dutch suddenly could compete with gate fees at the time of maybe only 40 euros. Here it is, up to 3.4 million tonnes last year, our prediction of 3.7 million tonnes. It's coming mostly from England, a bit from Scotland and Ireland, Northern Ireland as well. And it's going to the Netherlands is the big one, here it is, the orange blob, Germany growing, Sweden growing, and then there's some others as well. I think what's perhaps interesting is to see, Holland isn't growing anymore. Well, that's because it's only got so much capacity. That's Holland full. And obviously this doesn't just keep going up. There are facilities at the other end that can only take so much waste. So the reason to talk about exports is to point out that the market is becoming genuinely European. Residual waste is becoming commoditised in the way that recycler was in the past. So we've expanded the residual waste infrastructure review into a northern cluster. Our aim is to go European. We had to start somewhere, and this is where we decided to start. We've basically gone for the nations that are active and closest to the UK. We will go across the rest of Europe. There's only so much you can do in the time available. One thing I'll just say here is that waste is travelling distances we never imagined. Only 10 years ago, I can remember back 15, 20 years ago only when waste was collected by the collection authority and tipped in the landfill provided by the disposal authority. Typically travelled 20 or 30 miles, that was it, maximum, unless you were Bristol and then you trained it up to Buckinghamshire for some unknown reason. And waste basically didn't travel. Today we're seeing waste travel 300-400 miles relatively happily. The importance of that is that whereas 5-10 years ago, if you had a facility developed, in Yorkshire, and you were a waste producer in London, it was irrelevant to you. You'd never get your waste to Yorkshire. You wouldn't even think about it. But now, of course, what's happening is that, the Dutch are dragging waste in from Yorkshire from small transfer stations. The minute that site opens there, and their sites are full, the minute the new Yorkshire facility opens there, that 150, 200,000 tonnes, Chris will tell me the figure because he'll know it, when that opens there, the waste that was going there is suddenly going to become, that's going to make space available in the facility in the Netherlands that it was going to. And the operator of the facility in the Netherlands will now target London. So all of a sudden, we've got waste joined up. Capacity in Germany or the Netherlands, or waste or capacity in the UK affects other nations because of how far the waste is travelling. And that's a concept that we've all, frankly, got to get far more used to. How am I doing for time? I'm not doing too bad. We're back on time. I'm now making us late, but only because I started 15 minutes late. So, don't like to have too many words on a presentation, but I wanted to put this one in because when I reviewed the report this morning with Chris, this one jumped out at me. This is what we look at. I didn't really highlight the countries. 11 countries, there they are. I'm sure you recognise them all. I don't need to go through them. But in those 11 countries, there's about 104, 105 million tonnes of treatment capacity. Our definition, operating under construction or which is committed. And by the way, all the figures I've shown you so far and everything we're talking about so far is actually very conservative in one crucial respect. We are not allowing for any capacity that is not yet committed, financially committed. So let's think of an example. I'll just state some facts. We have a facility in Avonmouth where Viridor have a planning consent. As far as we understand, that isn't a financially closed facility. We have friends in Viridor here. And therefore, it's not in there in terms of capacity. But if that does become financially closed, then it's extra capacity. So the point is there's lots of sites with planning consent. Some of them probably will never happen. A lot of them probably will never happen, but quite a lot of them may well happen. We don't include those until they come through the system. So 105 million tonnes in Europe. And that capacity is made up, need to look that way to speak, don't I? 382 EFW, 13 ACTs. Actually quite interesting to see, even on Europe, ACTs are struggling a bit. 103 mostly MBT, 73 EID, basically biomass facilities that co-fire, which we take account of and we make some assumptions about how much waste they might take. And 102 cement kilns, which as we know will take some waste as a replacement fuel for fossil fuels. So, heading towards the end, last couple of slides. What have we found in Europe? Where is Europe? So I just need to sort of talk you through this slide a little bit. Here we have tonnies up the million tonnes a year up this side. We have the 11 nations across here. Waste, we've got the municipal waste let's just talk about waste generally. So we have all the waste here, in these bars up here. Initially, look at all of the waste, including inside the dashed line. So that's the state today. That's 2015 with the dashed line. So Poland today, that's how much waste it has. The reason this is dashed is that's what it will be at in 2030 if it recycles according to the circular economy targets. So that's the waste disappearing in Poland due to increases in recycling. It's starting with a very low recycling rate, so it loses a lot more. You move to France, actually France, only at 23% recycling rate, believe it or not, it's going to lose a lot of waste as it recycles more. You go to somewhere like the UK, we've still got a lot of recycling to do to get from the average of low 40s to the mid 60s. There's the waste that we lose as a result, and you can look at all the other nations as well. Then we've got these charts, these bars here. This is the treatment capacity, the non-landfill, and non-recycling obviously, treatment capacity. Very little in Poland at the moment, quite a lot in France, very little in Czechia, a bit in Norway, Iceland, here's Belgium, Denmark building up. And look, we start to get to the nations, even with the existing amount of waste, we start to get to the nations where there's currently overcapacity. And we know that because if you go back to the export chart from the UK, that's where our waste is being exported to, because of course they're the ones who can offer it. Oh look, here's another one, Netherlands, overcapacity here, hence they're importing. Sweden, quite a big overcapacity, hence they're importing. Germany, same again. But even these countries, Sweden actually, interestingly in particular, by proportion, has got a lot of waste to come out of the residual waste stream. Sweden only recycles in the, Dominic will kill me if I get this wrong, somewhere in the 30s I think. It's not a high recycler. Denmark's not a high recycler. Denmark's and Sweden and Netherlands are very good at not landfilling, but the way they do that is by burning a lot. So you go forward to 2030, ignore the dashed parts, and that's the picture you get. And we've actually then aligned these from left to right, where they have more waste than capacity, more capacity than waste. So Poland in 2030, quite a bit of undercapacity still. France, a little bit of undercapacity. These nations, much for muchness, I suppose, they're quite close. Quite a lot more overcapacity here. Netherlands, the overcapacity grows. Sweden, the overcapacity grows quite a lot. Same in Germany. The UK, interestingly, and all this does is take you from the beginning to the end of the chart we looked at in the UK earlier that shows big gap, this is all being landfilled, and then whoosh, it goes the other way if we're not careful. We go through the overcapacity line and, in theory, could carry on. It's interesting that the UK is the only one switching from one to the other, just as an observation. And so you've got those most undercapacity here and those most overcapacity there. Now, I'll just flag again, I've only got one more slide to show you, just flag again that doesn't allow for any new facilities coming on stream that aren't currently committed. Even if they've got consent, they're not in this system. And we know lots of plans for new facilities. So finally, if we put all of that together and accumulate that all together as a Northern European cluster, and by the way, we assume, just for the purpose of this next slide, that waste isn't coming in and out of that Northern European cluster of 11 nations, and of course it is, but we're making that assumption just to see what happens when we put all these together. This is what you get. So exactly the same format chart as the UK. There's your 140 odd, 150 million tonnes of waste. Currently it's coming down as everybody recycles. And remember, in the circular economy package, there's a 2025 target as well. You can't just wait and then claim you're going to do it all at the end. There's a 2025 target. Here we are at 2030. The reason we've taken out 2035, just out of interest, the main reason is, and we haven't modelled this differently, we may do this in future, some nations have a 5-year derogation, or will probably have a 5-year derogation on the circular economy recycling target. So 2030 to 35 is a sensible place to look at. Here's all the operating facilities. There's 104 million tonnes worth, or whatever it was I said earlier, 100, with the under construction facilities and a little bit of committed as well. And of course, what you see as we recycle more is that you are in danger. We are in danger of, even in the situation that we are now, with places like Poland having 25 million tonnes of undercapacity needing facilities, even if they don't do anything, if you balance all these countries together, you actually could argue you don't need any more facilities. Now, obviously the concern is that there's lots of activity. We know there's a lot of activity. Poland's seen as a very interesting market from that respect. So there it is. We didn't know what this was going to show us till Chris finished doing the calculations. There's work to be done on this to refine the assumptions behind each of the nations, and that will tweak this a little bit. There's work to be done on this to expand into other European nations, and I'll be the first to say that we've targeted the nations that we have selected, and geographically it's sensible to select those. They are a lot of the nations that have a lot of infrastructure capacity. Elsewhere in Europe, there's a lot of waste where there isn't capacity. So this picture will change as you move into different parts of Europe, and that health warning needs to be taken account of. Thank you very much.